Hey folks, today we're going to be installing the Powerstop Extreme Z36 carbon ceramic pads, the drilled and slotted rotors, and we're also going to be installing the red powder-coated calipers. The replacement calipers are direct OEM replacements. They're remanufactured, pressure tested, powder-coated red to give it that sporty look. The true upgrade begins with the carbon fiber infused ceramic brake pads and the installation of the drilled and slotted rotors. Now I know what you're thinking, my Jeep's not a sports car, but you don't always need a really fast vehicle to warrant a brake upgrade. If you're rolling around on large tires on your rig, you'll know what I'm talking about. So we're going to take care of that issue by installing this Powerstop braking package. Here's a breakdown of the items I use for the install. You're going to need some brake fluid. You also need some brake clean to clean off the components. Some thread locker. You can either use a blue or red thread locker. Some zip ties to hold up the brake line. Towels for cleanup. A couple socket extensions and some sockets. A few wrenches. And a few other miscellaneous tools for the install. My install is going to start at the rear passenger side, and we're going to end up at the front driver's side. So here's a picture of the rotor and calipers and brake pads for the rear passenger side. We're going to be replacing the rotor, the caliper, and the brake pads inside the caliper. The areas that we're going to focus on for the caliper removal are going to be the caliper adapter bolts here. These are the caliper mounting bolts here. And then the banjo bolt, which is your brake fluid line. We're going to start by opening up the clamshell and removing the brake pads from inside the caliper. You'll want to loosen the top bolt, and then you'll be able to slide the clamshell down. This will now allow you to remove both the inner and outer brake pads from the shell. Now that the brake pads are removed, you just want to close up the caliper and reinstall the bolt and just hand tighten it. Next, with the caliper still mounted, we want to loosen the banjo bolt. It'll be a lot easier to loosen it now than it would be once the caliper is removed. You'll notice some brake fluid start to leak out. That's okay. Just make sure you got a tail underneath of it, and then just tighten it up a little bit to stop the flow. Now, we're going to be removing the two bolts to hold the caliper to the axle. These bolts are going to be torqued on there pretty well, so if you have an extension or a breaker bar, it'll be a lot easier to take these two bolts off. Before you completely remove the caliper from the axle, make sure your brake line is free, so when you remove the caliper and place it on something, that you're not hanging all the weight on that brake line. Now we're going to remove the rotor. If you're unable to just slide it right off, just find a dead blow sledge and then hit it a couple times, and that should loosen it up. Or at least get it loose enough that you can be able to work it right off. Now you'll just be able to slide on the drilled and slotted Powerstop rotor. I threaded on a couple of the lug nuts just so I can keep the rotor in place while I finish the rest of the install. As I mentioned earlier, the Powerstop replacement calipers are a direct OEM replacement. You'll see that the part numbers listed here on the factory calipers are the same part numbers here on the Powerstop powder-coated red replacement calipers. Now we're going to install the replacement calipers. When reinstalling the brake line and the banjo bolt, we're not going to reuse the prior copper washers. We're going to use the new copper washers that come with the calipers. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to use some thread locker to reinstall the bolts. In this case, we're going to use some blue thread locker on the bolts to reinstall the caliper back to the axle. And put another bolt. Now remember earlier we broke free the banjo bolt from the factory caliper. Now we'll be able to remove the bolt and remove the brake line completely. There will be some brake fluid that leaks off of the brake line. Make sure you have a towel or something handy available for you. This stuff is very corrosive and you want to clean it up right away from anything it gets on. When you remove the banjo bolt, the copper washer may still be attached. So you want to get a pair of pliers or something to remove the washer from the bolt. Now you'll install the new copper washer onto the banjo bolt, feed the banjo bolt through the brake line adapter, and then make sure you put on the last copper washer onto the other end before you mount it to the caliper. Now we're just going to tighten that banjo bolt back up to stop all the brake fluid from leaking out. On our next step, we're going to torque it down. The banjo bolt on the rear caliper brake hoses get torqued down to 23 foot-pounds. Again, you want to make sure you clean up all the brake fluid from around the brake caliper. Next, the rear caliper adapter bolts get torqued down to 55 foot-pounds. Now we're going to open up the caliper so we can install the carbon ceramic brake pads. Powerstop includes the high temp lubricant that we're going to install into the brake pads. We're going to put these in places where the metal and metal come in contact with each other on the caliper. You can place the high temp lubricant either directly onto the brake pad or onto the caliper components itself. You just don't want to get any of that lubricant onto the face of the brake pad or onto the rotor. Once the brake pads are installed, you can close up the caliper, reinstall the bolt, and then we're going to torque the bolts down. Both of the rear caliper adapter mounting bolts will be torqued down to 26 foot-pounds each. Now that the passenger rear side is done, we're going to work our way over to the driver's rear side. We're going to use the same process, same tools, same everything to complete the install on this side. And here's a reminder of what the torque settings should be on the braking components on the rear driver and passenger side brakes. Next, we're going to start on the front brakes. We're going to start on the passenger side first. So here's a picture of the front caliper adapter bolts, the front caliper adapter mounting bolts, and the banjo bolt on the front caliper. When working on the front passenger side, turn the steering wheel to the driver's side to get easy access to the bolts. So we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to remove the top bolt from the caliper. That'll allow us to open up the clamshell and remove the brake pads from inside. Once the brake pads are removed, we're just going to close up the caliper and then hand tighten the bolt back in place. Now we just want to loosen the banjo bolt from the caliper. Then we just want to tighten it up just enough to stop the brake fluid from flowing out. You'll notice in this shot that I unintentionally removed the banjo bolt completely from the adapter, causing all the brake fluid to leak out from the caliper. You'll notice when we do the driver's side that I do it the correct way. With the factory caliper removed, we'll now be able to uninstall the factory rotor. And then next we'll be able to install the Powerstop drilled and slotted rotor. As with the rear calipers, the front calipers are direct factory replacements. You'll notice that the part number on the factory front calipers are the same part number on the replacement upgraded powder-coated calipers. Now that we've got the caliper installed, the banjo bolt's reconnected to the caliper, we're now going to open up the clamshell and then install the brake pads into the front. Again, you'll want to apply the high temperature lubricant to the metal mating surfaces of both the brake pad and the caliper. Now that the front passenger side is completed, we're next going to move over to the final piece on the driver's side. Now here's the correct way of getting access to the front caliper adapter bolts. With the caliper open and the clamshell down, it'll allow you to get a socket and a brake bar in to loosen up the bolts. This will allow you to close the clamshell and then loosen up the banjo bolt with the brake line still attached. Here again, with the caliper closed, we're just going to loosen up the banjo bolt and then retighten it up to stop the brake fluid from flowing out. As a reminder, when you're reinstalling the brake line onto the new caliper, make sure that you're using the new copper washers. Now you'll just want to install the new carbon ceramic Powerstop brake pads. And lastly, you just want to make sure your front brakes are torqued down to specifications. Once all the brake hardware is installed, I'll now need to complete a full bleed of the braking system. This will get all the air out of the brake lines. Be sure to click on the link in the video there to see how I set up the one-man bleed system. Now we just need to make sure that the proper break-in procedure happens for the upgraded brake pads and rotors. Thanks for staying tuned into the video. I hope you liked it. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. I'll be happy to answer everything that I can. If you like the video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Now it's time to get RockTrooper back out there and put those brakes to the test.